welcome. We have a very interesting program we're going to be dealing here tonight. I have in the studio with me some folks who have children as their the bedrock of what they do, why they do what they do. And we're going to be having a discussion tonight, and the discussion is going to be centered around the neglect of children in Guyana. Both objective and subjectively, we look at the topic. So if you're a parent and you have children that are of school age or grandchildren, or indeed if you're a child, because tonight you're going to know as a child, you're going to know your rights too. And so if you have any reason to be interested in this program, or you've got your grandma, you got your son or your daughter, you need them to watch and understand what's happening, please bring them around, call them wherever they are, and so we can have a nice heated discussion tonight. All right, so I'm going to go right now. I've got some folks in the studio with me, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and then we're going to go into the discussion as we deal with this very topical issue of the neglect of our dear children here in Georgetown, Guyana. So I have with me Mr. Tinney from ChildLinK. So would you, I'm going to give you a moment just now, and I also have Ms. Vifehouse, all right? So I think I should go with the ladies first, you don't mind, right? And she's also more beautiful than both of us combined. True. And so Ms. Vifehouse, tell us who you are and briefly what you do.
Well, I'm Jillian Vifehouse, Chief Schools Welfare Officer, Ministry of Education. At the Ministry of Education, our main role is to look into attendance and punctuality, which we are guided by the Education Act 3901, which says that shall be the duty of the parent to ascertain that their child attends school regularly and punctually.
Okay. All right, that's brief and succinct. Thank you so much. Mr. Tinney, tell us what you do, who you are, and what you do.
Okay, good evening, viewers. My name is Asani Tinney, and I'm the Communications Officer at ChildLinK. Well, ChildLinK is a not-for-profit organization whose vision is to create a Guyanese society where every child has the right to grow up in a safe and secure family and community. So my job is basically to promote the work of ChildLinK.
Okay, Mr. Tinney, what guides ChildLinK? I mean, who came up with the concept? What is your modus operandi? Are you a best practice organization? If so, who came up with the concept? Talk a little about that. Who provides the guidance that you follow in ChildLinK?
Okay, well, as I mentioned, our vision is to protect children from violence and abuse, and we do utilize international best practices. ChildLinK is a member of an international organization or an international alliance called Family for Every Child. And this consists of 40 civil society organizations in countries worldwide, and we do adhere to best practices, international best practices.
Okay. Ms. Vifehouse, how many, you deal with guidance counselors and
Schools welfare and guidance counselors.
And how many of them do we have in Guyana? Where are they located?
We have 40 members of staff. We only have 9 guidance counselors.
Okay.
5 presently in Region 3 and 4 in Georgetown.
Okay. All right. And the intention is to get more, I hope, that the government plans to get more. And
at least
talk a little about
114 more.
How many?
114 more.
Okay. And they've already begun to advertise for that, right?
Yes, very well.
Right. So you're expecting, and they will cover all 10 regions?
Should.
That's the intention. All right, Mr. Vifehouse, what necessitated ChildLinK? What it is that was obtained in Guyana at the time that brought about the need for ChildLinK, notwithstanding that you've got the Ministry of Education, you've got Child Protection Services. What caused ChildLinK to come about?
Well, our children needs protection. ChildLinK is here to assist or to do our part in the work of protecting children. Protecting children is everyone's business, and it will take a collective effort to address scourges such as child abuse. So ChildLinK, one of the things that we stress on is collaboration. Again, child protection is everybody's business, and one organization, the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Social Protection, they can't do it alone. So we're here to play our part in ensuring that our children have the opportunity to develop their full potential.
Okay. And what are do you have like a preponderance of cases? What is your main focus? What aspect of child neglect do you have a main focus?
Okay, our main focus is protecting children from violence and abuse. ChildLinK has, we have what is called child advocacy centers. The Child Advocacy Center, we have them 1 in 3 regions, in regions 3, 4, and 5. Mm-hmm. The purpose of the Child Advocacy Center is to, well, we work along with the Childcare and Protection Agency, and we conduct forensic interviews for children who are referred to us from the CPA, who are sexually abused, and we provide forensic interviews. Basically, that is a trained forensic interviewer will interview the child while a member of the Guyana Police Force and also the CPA, they look on in a different room so that they can get the information, so that that child wouldn't have to repeat the tragic ordeal of being abused. And we also provide trauma-focused counseling for children who have been in those situations. Apart from that, ChildLinK also we have been doing projects that will help us to realize our vision. And again, our vision is to create a society where every child has the right to a safe and secure family and community. And we've been in operation since 1995, and over the past 20 years, we've worked with over 12,000 children, and we've also worked with parents. We do a lot of advocacy work, going into the community, into schools, to sensitize children about their rights and abuse.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You have this thing down pat. Mm-hmm. And you public relations officer for ChildLinK?
Communications officer.
You're doing a tremendous job. You got everything in the top of your head. I want to go back a little with you. I want you to talk a little about, the forensic interviews. Mm-hmm. Now, this is for legal proceedings, the forensic interviews that you do. Is it fact-finding? Is it a part of the therapy that the child needs, or is it gathering information for legal?
The forensic interviews, it's to gather information that the police and the CPA need to just to finish their investigation or to make progress in terms of their investigation. Whatever would have happened with the child, that is part of that is evidence. So it's just to get the information.
Is it also used to as a data collection moment for the child's for therapy? Because if you have the child there regurgitating this case, then you would think that would be a good time for whoever is going to work with the child by way of counseling and so on to hear that, so that too would provide information that they can work with.
The trauma-focused therapy that the Child Advocacy Center we use, that is separate from the forensic interview. The trauma-focused therapy, it is well, those persons are trained, so it's a separate activity from the forensic interview.
I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to think about it. I'll come back to the answer to the question, but think of it. I want you to tell the audience, the viewers, how effective is that interview when that is done and is given to the police. How is that used to bring about convictions and so on? All right? I want you to talk a little bit about that. But I want to go to Ms. Vivos. Ms. Vivos, what are some of the main situations you have that you deal with given your department? What are some of the most prevalent problems that you're having in the schools right now, in the regions that you're in?
Now, we having like violence in school. That is on the rise. Recently, we had our cell phone pornography issue that we have to deal with now. But when those issues arise, we prepared an action plan and we circulated it into the 10 administrative regions.
Okay.
And the welfare officers and guidance counselors, they are going into the schools along with psychologists, and we are working with our children to have them reduce the kind of incidents.
All right. Now, I'm going to come back for you to answer. Just want to have the technician. Dominic, just cue up the video there, the puppet video for us. And after Mr. Tinney answers this question, we'll show it. So, how effective are the forensic interviews that you do? How do they help with convictions and arrests and so on?
Well, the purpose of the forensic interview, or our aspect in the justice system, is basically to get the information out so that the police and the CPA can further their investigation. It will be difficult for me to quantify how effective it is. In fact, the conviction rate in and of itself, although there's been improvements, we still have a long way to go. But at ChildLinK, at the child advocacy centers, we're doing our best to play our part.
Okay, and I understand that when you talk about the conviction rate not being substantive, it also has to do with what happens at the time that the child is molested. What immediately follows that? If the child complains of an abuse, how that child should be handled, what should be the process? Because if the child is, we want to say contaminated, but that might complicate it. If the child is sexually molested, for instance, then the child cannot have a bath, the child cannot wash their clothes, and because all of that would contaminate the evidence, right? So that there should be some process that parents or guardians need to know if the child complains, that there need to be some immediate things that have to be done so that you don't dilute the evidence, which would go on to hamper the conviction, right?
Yes, if as a parent your child comes to you and reveals certain information to you, you have to act straight away. A child who's been sexually abused, the first person or the first person that should be contacted, the first organization, is the Childcare and Protection Agency, and then they can give advice from there. Or even if you go to the police, they're supposed to know the protocol that they would take certain statements, and then they'd have to have that child go through a medical examination, and then the Childcare and Protection Agency, I'm sure they would follow the same principle. But as soon as a parent, again, as soon as you're aware of something, as soon as the child reveals certain information to you, you have to act quickly.
Okay. Now we're going to go into a video, but tell us a little about what this video is about.
Okay, so the video, ChildLinK, or through the Child Rights Alliance, we've been doing research. We've published 2 research papers, one on the experience of children in institutional care, and the second is on child neglect in Guyana. Well, this video focuses on the experiences of children in institutional care. It looks at a situation that may cause a child to be drafted into institutional care and what that experience may be.
Okay, all right. So let's watch that video now, and then we'll come back and continue our discussion.
I was 8 years old and my brother John was 6 years old. We lived with our mommy and daddy. My daddy was a mechanic and my mother was a domestic helper. My mommy and daddy both worked very hard, but daddy would spend most of his time at work and then at home. My mommy would ensure when daddy came home that his meal would be ready on the table. But one evening, my father was very upset and he was arguing with mommy, and mommy was also arguing with daddy. They quarreled for a long time and I thought they were going to hurt each other.
Leave me alone!
From that day, they would quarrel almost every day. The quarreling got worse, and they decided to move out. My brother and I were very sad when Daddy left. Mommy told us it's for the best that Daddy leave, and things will be better.
Some of the things that I've been
And Mom
through.
started to drink a lot and would beat and quarrel with me and my brother. Many nights, she would go out with her friends and come back very late or until the next morning. Mommy had many friends coming to see her. She and them were always drinking home. Some days, we were alone even when Mommy was at home because she was always too tired or drunk to cook or get us ready for school. When my brother and I were hungry, we were left to make our own meals. It got so bad that our neighbor would give us food so that we would not go hungry some
Boys,
days.
come, y'all share this.
Mommy drinking became worse that she lost her job. Life became harder for us. We hardly had money. Our father never came to visit us or send money for us. My brother and I were missing school, and the days that we went to school, we would have to walk a long distance to and from school. One week we didn't have any money. The only thing we took to school was a bottle of water. But luckily for me, my friends decided to share with me whatever they brought for lunch. My teacher noticed that I wasn't bringing anything to eat. My absence from school, my dirty uniform, and that my grades dropped in class. She wanted to speak with my mother, but whenever I told her, she would say she would come to visit my school, but she never did. One morning, our teacher announced that we would be having a very special visitor. She introduced the class to a woman who was from the Child Rights Alliance, a child care counselor.
Good morning.
The woman told us about the various types of abuse, what we should do if we feel that we were being abused, and our rights as children. I learned a lot from the counselor that I knew that I'm being abused but too ashamed to tell anyone about my mommy. I thought maybe I should tell my mommy what the counselor said and maybe she might change. I was happy to get home that afternoon to see my mommy that day. When I reached at home, I was eager and nervous as well to tell mommy what I have learned at school from the Child Rights Alliance child care counselor, but mommy wasn't in the living room, so I raced to her bedroom where my mommy would usually still be in bed. But I wasn't ready to see what I saw that afternoon. My mommy was lying on the floor, not moving. I tried waking mommy up, but she wasn't waking up. I ran across the street to my neighbor, Miss Ross. My neighbor tried waking mommy up.
Wake up.
Mommy was not waking up. Miss Ross called 911. The ambulance came very quickly and they took my mother to the hospital. When mommy left, Miss Ross called a taxi which took us to the hospital. At the hospital, we waited a few hours before the doctor came and told us that my mother will be alright. Miss Ross asked what had happened to her, and the doctor told us my mother had drank a lot of sleeping pills which caused her not to move or wake up. I began to cry. Why would my mother want to drink so much sleeping pills? Doesn't she love us? We don't know where our father is, and we only have her. Just then Miss Ross comforted me and told me that everything will be alright.
Everything will be alright.
Miss Ross allowed us to stay with her that night. I could
room.
see that she was worried too. She told my brother and me that she doesn't think our mother can take care of us. I knew my mother likes to drink, but if she gets help, she can be a better parent. Next morning, Miss Ross made us breakfast and she gave my brother and I money to buy lunch in school. That day at school, all I could think about was my mother and how much I missed her, and I wanted her to come home. Our walk back home seemed longer than usual that day. At Miss Ross' house, she told us that we would not be attending school. I was happy that I wasn't going to school. She told us that she wanted to visit our mother in the hospital, and she also needed to go somewhere important afterwards. When Miss Ross left home that morning, my brother and I played in the yard. But when Miss Ross came home, she returned with someone. And what happened that day would change me and my brother's life forever.
Well, welcome back to our discussion on child neglect here in Guyana. And we have been joined on the panel this evening by Miss Sherry-Ann. Sherry-Ann, you're going to tell us a little about yourself and what you do, so welcome. So go ahead and tell us where you are and what you do.
Good evening. I am Sherry-Ann Vandier. I'm a Senior Probation and Social Services Officer with the Ministry of Social Protection attached to the Childcare and Protection Agency. And I'm happy to be a part of the panel. ChildLinK is one of our partners in dealing with child abuse in Guyana, so we're happy to always collaborate.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, so let's get into this aspect of neglect. Mr. Tenney, how do you define neglect?
Okay, so neglect can be defined as the consistent failure of a caregiver to meet a child's basic needs for food, shelter, supervision, love, medical treatment when required, and also attending school regularly.
Okay, good. And let me ask, Sherry-Ann, how do you, there are different kinds of neglect, right? So how would you classify the neglect?
Well, there is willful neglect, where the parent has the means to provide, as my colleague said, food, clothing, shelter, to ensure that their child attends school every day, ensure that they have access to health care, but they decide not to. They choose not to.
That's willful neglect.
Willful neglect. And then there is neglect that comes out of a family not being able to provide, right? There's issues of poverty and that sort of thing, so they're not able to give the child all that they need, and it burdens that parent that they're unable to do that. It is neglect, but it's not willfully done.
Okay, so Ms. Vivals, you look for stuff like that as a part of your,
Yes.
because that can help to exacerbate the absences and so on, right? How do you handle that?
Well, in terms of neglect, most time we will do referrals. When we have cases of neglect, we don't actually handle it. We refer to other agencies to have them to assist the parent, because as my colleague said, we have neglect in different forms. Sometimes it's not like the parent willfully neglecting the child, but it can be because of financial constraints, unemployment, and those sort of things. The parent is unable to provide for the child. So we would actually refer those cases to other agencies to assist the parents.
Okay.
Pastor, if I may,
Great, yes.
Yeah, in terms of neglect, it is the consistent failure of a caregiver to meet the child's basic need, but it's provided that they have the wherewithal to do so. That is an important thing that we have to keep into consideration. ChildLinK, we would have done a research focusing on that, child neglect in Guyana. It can be found on our website, www.childlinkgy.org. You click on the CRA, the Child Rights Alliance tag, and you can have access to the full report. But we know that there are a lot of cases where parents, they're security guards, so to speak, and they're working at nights. Obviously, the children, they're home. And in fact, we know of a case where it was in the news where this gentleman, he went to work. He was a security guard. And while he was at work that evening, his brother came and the brother murdered the child.
Right.
Now that father is not guilty of neglect.
Correct.
because of the circumstances, he was doing his best, and although the children weren't supervised, it wasn't a case where he had the capacity to do so,
Okay.
and he willfully neglected that, his duty. He went and he did the right thing, tried to earn money to provide for his children, and that resulted. So it's very important that we realize that as long as we know that the caregiver doesn't have the wherewithal to make certain provisions, then we cannot classify that as willful neglect.
Ms. Vandia, how prevalent is neglect, either willful or deliberate or not deliberate? How prevalent is? I mean, because you that's your thing.
Well, neglect covers a multitude of things. So it ranks very high when we record cases of abuse, because it covers not attending school regularly, not providing food, clothing, and shelter. It also covers things like not nurturing, not having a child feel a part of a family, all right? Not providing love and attention. Neglect covers all those things. So when it comes to numbers, neglect will rank very high because it covers all those areas.
Well, to add to that, the child neglect in Guyana report states that child neglect, it's the most prevalent form of child maltreatment. Now, between 2013 to 2016, this is covered in the report, there were 12,917 cases, reported cases of child abuse to the CPA, and 6,448, or 50% of the cases had some aspect of child neglect. So it is the most prevalent form of child abuse in Guyana.
Ms. Vivos, the amount of counselors you have now and the anticipated amounts, is that going to, how is that going to affect the issues of neglect that you experience in the Ministry of Education particularly? I mean, what role would they be playing to reduce these numbers that we're hearing here?
Well, actually, our role most time we would do home visit, we do school visit. Most of our cases would come from the schools. Now, the teachers would be the first encounter and they refer to us. So I think with 114 counselors coming on board, we would be able to deal more with these aspects, because you see sometimes because of the shortage of staff, we cannot reach all of our schools to find out certain things about children.
Okay.
And even if we find out, sometimes it's difficult for us to follow up.
Okay.
Well, the Child Rights Alliance, we can play a part in that, because one of the things that we do, as I would have mentioned, is advocacy. We go into schools and we go into communities and we sensitize persons about child abuse, including child neglect. And what we found is that when we sensitize, especially children or parents, then some folks would come out and report. They would say, well, you know what, this is what is happening in my home. And we have to remember that although there would have been 12,000 reported cases of abuse, it is known that the majority of cases go unreported. So when the Child Rights Alliance, when we go into the communities, into the schools, and we sensitize persons, we will find that persons will come out and they will say what is going on. And once it is reported, whether to the CPA, whether to welfare, whether to the Child Rights Alliance, once we know about it, then we can help.
Is neglect age specific?
No.
Is there any age of
Abuse
prevalence? Is there any prevalency?
Yes, there is an age, yes.
What we found in the research is that children between the ages of 8 to 13, they're more likely to be abused. 34% of the cases were between 8 to 13. And then the second highest was 0 to 3, babies. And then the third highest was 4 to 7. So children who are not at that stage in life where they're that independent, they're the ones that are most vulnerable. And what we found is that children 14 and above, I guess they would have reached a stage in their development where they can more fend for themselves, so neglect doesn't impact them as much. But the younger children, 13 and below, they're most vulnerable to neglect.
When I worked with the in the United States, I worked with the family and community specialist for the school system there in Indiana. And one of the things that I had to do is I had to spot cases of child neglect or abuse. So I was sent by the Ministry of Education to the school, but I represented the child, not the school. And so I worked as a mediator between the parent and the school, but on behalf of the child. And a lot of the times when we found neglect, it was because of the same reasons that you were giving, financial reasons. So a part of what we had to do is we had to connect the parent to organizations so that the parent could be improved. So if it was an academic situation, it was purely financial, it was alcohol or drug addiction, whatever. Do you guys, have you reached that stage in Guyana to where you are able to connect the parent with organizations to help the parent to reduce the neglect of the child? How does that work?
Yes, well, I can touch on it, and Ms. Van Dier, because both the Child Rights Alliance and the Childcare and Protection Agency, we have parenting skills sessions. So whenever we find out a case where a child may be going through, maybe experiencing neglect or any form of abuse, and we realize that the parent has to be part of the solution, we bring in the parent into the counseling process and we work with them. So the purpose of the parenting skills education sessions is basically to strengthen the parents' skills so that they can be a better parent and provide for the needs of the child. And I guess Ms. Van Dier could talk
before I go
about
to Ms. Van Dier, I know Ms. Van Dier is going to have a lot to say. Let me just bring in Ms. Vivos a little. Because you say you do home visits, right, Ms. Vivos?
Yes.
So you look for those things too.
Yes.
And how does that go?
Well, most of the time when we visit the OLA, we assess the situation, then we refer. As I said, most of our case, we just refer to Child Care and Protection,
Okay, so-
because we go up to a certain level.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so it go back to you, Ms. Van
Right.
Dier.
As my colleague said, we do parenting training because we understand that a lot of the issues begin with the parenting. And so the agency, the Child Protection Agency, has a parenting program because we understand that sometimes parents need to have some light shed on their roles and responsibilities as parents. Sometimes they don't know, sometimes they do, sometimes we need to emphasize the importance. So we have parenting training programs that help them to understand what are their roles and responsibilities. We get to understand what are some of their challenges, what are some of the issues that they're dealing with personally, and have those issues addressed. But not only do we have parenting training, we're also able to link parents, because when there are issues of poverty and so on, me telling you that you need to love the child and the child needs to go to school every day will not help that situation.
Correct.
What you need is a job.
Correct.
So what we do as well is we link you to other agencies within the Ministry of Social Protection that can assist you with that. If you're the type of person that would like to have your own business, there are sections that deal with that as well, and we're able to link you with that as well. If you have an issue with an addiction, drugs and alcohol, we're able to link you with those services. So there are services available, all right? Sometimes persons don't know, but that's why we need programs like this one so that persons can be informed.
Beautiful. Well, when we do a SWOT analysis, one of the, in the acronym SWOT, one is the W is for weakness, right? So I'm going to take a little, let's do a little of this here now. Beginning with you, Ms. Vivos, what are some of the weaknesses that you have experienced given your role and given the problem of neglect that we have in Guyana?
One of our is follow-up.
Your inability to follow.
Follow.
And that comes back to the lack of personnel.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Tini, what are some of the weaknesses that ChildLinK has? And this is a good plug now for you to ask for money, right? So
Well, the culture, the Guyanese culture of secrecy. What we find is that whenever something is going on in the home, a lot of times persons don't want it to be made public because they feel that it's going to bring shame on the home. So they'd rather cover up the abuse than to report and for the child to get help. So that culture of secrecy, that culture of silence, that is the greatest challenge that we face.
okay. All right. And Sherry, what are some of the limitations that you have in your Child Protection Agency?
Well, we cannot be everywhere all the time. So it's very important for the Childcare and Protection Agency to partner not only with non-governmental organizations and other government organizations, but because we're not everywhere all the time, to combat that weakness that we have progressed and have put more effort into community groups, in empowering members of a community to understand that the children living in this community are your responsibility. You are our eyes and our ears, the Child Protection Agency's eyes and ears in this community. So if something goes wrong, you should know. And we go about equipping you to deal with those issues. Of course, if there's something that you need to report to the agency that we have to deal with, we will do that. But we're working on having the community play a bigger role in protecting our children.
Okay.
This view of the community, or the importance of the community, that cannot be understated. And now, neglect has various forms. You have physical, you have educational, emotional, and medical. But there's an aspect of neglect that I like to bring out. That's community neglect.
Okay.
And it's very harmful. That community neglect is basically when the community is aware of
Right.
some form of abuse that is going on somewhere, and they refuse to report it. When that happens, of course, the child or the family can't get help. And we would have seen this. You have the case in Borbies with this young man then, or Archibald. After he was killed and the police and the reporters started doing their digging, what they found is that a number of young men were abused, but they didn't say anything. So the community was aware that there was a perpetrator in the community, and nobody said anything. And because no one said anything, the authorities and the government ministries couldn't step in, and then we had this tragedy.
All right. Now, a lot of people are viewing, and a lot of people are saying, we want numbers, we want how to know, yeah, me daughter, me son, me grandson. Good. So, while the people are going to get their pen and their pencils, they're going to go do that. Now, go get your pen and your pencils, because we can give out some numbers. But let me ask, while you get your pen and your pencil, what are the consequences for violators? People who don't report, people who harbor? Well, ChildLinK, I don't know if you, but who can answer? What are there any consequences for knowingly facilitating abuse? And if so, what is the process to enact the consequence?
Well, just as in cases of sexual abuse or in physical abuse, the law provides for parents that neglect their children. So a parent can be charged with neglect and be placed before the court and sentenced to time in prison. The law also provides for persons who are aware of an offense being committed against a child and knowingly not report it. Once there is evidence that you knew and you have not reported, you too can be charged and placed before the court.
Okay, good. All right. So, Ms. Vivo, it's your turn to look in the camera and give out all your information that people can get in touch with you. Or how do people get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with Schools Welfare at 225-9537.
Okay, say it again.
225-9537.
And that's the school welfare.
Schools Welfare, or 226-7062.
226
7062.
7062.
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Tenney.
Okay, so you can get in contact with ChildLinK at 231-7174. That's 231-7174, or 227-2023.
And you also have a website or Facebook page?
Yes, we have a Facebook page, ChildLinK Guyana or ChildLinK Inc. You can also email us at admin@childlinkgy.org.
Okay, and you have a ton of numbers. So.
But I will give you the hotline number, which is 227-0979. It's 24 hours a day. And we also have a Facebook page with much useful information on there. It has the articles that are usually published in the paper, 4 Minutes for Change, that can enlighten you on issues of child abuse and child care, child protection.
Repeat that number.
227-0979.
Okay, good. When we talked about the age of prevalence for abuse. We said 8 to 13. Now, I was only yesterday, someone sent me a link of children in the United States who are deviant and who act up. So a lot of times, the parents do their best, but children are growing up so fast these days that parents don't know how to parent some of these wayward children. How do you guys in your capacities deal with these kind of children? I'll begin with you, Ms. Vivals. How do you interact? What is the modus operandi? How do you deal with those kind of trouble when the children are the problems?
No, sometimes when the children are the problem, there's a root cause to the problem. Because sometimes we say, sometimes we say the child has a problem. But sometimes it just takes you like 5 minutes to talk with that child. So what we do, we will do a needs assessment, whereby we talk with the child to get out what is the root cause of that deviant behavior. And then we'll take it from there. Then we'll have our guidance counselor stepping in, and then we will work with that child probably over 6 weeks, see how the child will progress, 3 months. Or sometimes we even do it in groups. We do group sessions with all the kind of children that have a certain kind of behavior.
Okay.
Well, at ChildLinK, we don't view children as the problem.
No.
Wow.
No,
What
no.
we do, we do an assessment, and from that assessment, our counselors, we can find certain things. I'll give you an example. There was one case where there was a mom, a single mom. She was in law enforcement, and she came to us and she complained about her son and his behavior, and it was frustrating her. And the counselor called in the son and had some sessions with him. And what we discovered was that the young man was going through a period of adjustment, as every child would, going into the teenage years. And the mother didn't understand that there were certain changes going on with him biologically and in other ways. She didn't understand that. So she didn't know how to relate to him. So we called her in. We did some counseling, the parenting sessions with her to help her to understand the development of the young man. And when that happened, the relationship between the two improved. So the layman would look at that child and say, well, that child is a problem. But if you are a trained professional, you delve deep into the issue, you will find out that the child is not necessarily the problem. The problem is elsewhere. You just have to find the problem and solve it.
All right. Sherry, I want you to pretend you didn't hear a word he said. And tell me, how does Child Protection Agency deal with problem children?
Well, you see, I wish I could, but the Childcare and Protection Agency do not view children as bad children. We understand that behavior is learned, and you begin your learning at home. You see, sometimes parents forget that we're always teaching a lesson, that from the time the child is born, we are living our lives in front of our children. So however we behave and we operate and the attitudes that we have, our peculiarities, the child is absorbing all of that. And then when I exhibit that behavior, you're upset with me, and you say that I'm delinquent and I'm wayward, I'm doing the wrong thing because I'm acting out what you've taught me. So what we like to do is to get to the underlying cause of what we're seeing, what is really a symptom. All right, so we've got to find out what is happening at home to understand why a child is behaving in a particular way and address that.
Okay.
Now,
Go ahead.
we don't understand how simple things that we do as caregivers can affect a child. For example, let's say, as a parent, you talk your brother's name, how he's fat, and in the presence of the child,
Yes.
right? And maybe it's true that the brother is fat. So one day the brother comes over, and then the child says, Daddy say you fat, right? And you want to scold the child. Now the child is being honest. The person, or the child may have said, "Daddy said you're fat." So the child is being honest. That's what you did say, but you scold the child. Now, what lesson are you teaching that child? That you have to lie.
Now,
Yes.
You're teaching the child to lie in a
lie.
situation. And simple things like that, as parents, caregivers, we don't understand
The
that we're
long-term
the
effects.
long-term effects.
Yes.
Now, I'm wondering how to ask this question, given what you all said, because it begs then the question of corporal punishment in schools. If you're saying that no child is bad and that the child is reflecting the parent, then why do we discipline children corporally in school for acting like their parents in school? You understand? You see how it becomes complicated now, because you can't tell me, you guys educated children, professional, sit here and tell me the child is reflecting the parent. Then when the child goes to school, Ms. Vivos, you out your way again and say, don't act like your mother in here, don't act like your father in here. You see how it becomes complicated? And that's why I'm wondering if there isn't, and I guess you addressed it, Ms. Vivos, if there isn't a formal approach for children to begin to understand that they need to take some responsibility. Some onus needs to be placed, because let me tell you, children, especially in a society like Guyana with so many broken homes, children play parents against parents.
Yeah.
So mommy and daddy are divorced, so they don't live together.
It's out to the parent.
We always go with the parent who allows us to do the most, who
freedom.
spoil us the most,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So mommy said don't do it. Mommy said, daddy said do it, and so when daddy allows us, we said daddy tell me, and when mommy allows us, and we play parents against, we play grandma against mommy, you understand?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that as we move forward, that we probably need to broaden the scope so the children take onus for some of their behavior.
Let me just address that briefly. When we go into schools and we teach children not just about abuse but their rights,
Right.
but we also teach them about their
Responsibilities.
responsibilities.
But good, but this way was asking you for the last 5 minutes.
Yes, we teach them about their rights
And
And
their
their
responsibilities.
responsibilities and the consequences that are supposed to
Of
come
course.
Yeah.
with those responsibilities.
And that-
So you
and-
can't always
and,
tell
and
me.
that is why we work with both the parent
And
and the
child.
child, because it's not necessarily it's a case where it's the child fault alone or it's the parent's fault alone or what. You know, we work with everybody because there's some things about the parent the child needs to understand. So we work with the child, and there's something about the child that the parent needs to understand. So we work with the parent to bring about a synthesis.
Okay. Now, you guys are all educated beyond the average, and you probably would have done comparative studies. How does Guyana's situation by way of child neglect compare and contrast with our Caribbean sisters and brothers? Is there any? I know I'd spoken to Ms. Green, and she had said that a lot of her work is now being implemented in other countries. I was very excited to hear her say that. So I'm just wondering if you guys know how do we compare? You look like a numbers man. You spitting out, you spitting out numbers whole night, and I'm very impressed with how do we compare and contrast with our sister Caribbean countries?
Well, unfortunately, our report didn't do any comparative analysis. We just focus on what is happening in Guyana because the source, we sourced the data from the Childcare and Protection Agency, and of course they're doing work here, not elsewhere. But child neglect, what we have to understand about it, it's very extensive because you may have a child who's sexually abused. But why is that child sexually abused? Because maybe the parent isn't supervising the child. So a case of sexual abuse may have a component of neglect in it, right? A child may be physically abused. That could also be as a result of some form of neglect there. So we haven't done comparative studies in terms of our Caribbean brothers and sisters or other countries. But what we do know is that it's very extensive and it's a major problem here, and the consequences sometimes can be dire.
Right, and I want to touch on that just now. I just want to say though, I know that you play numbers. Sherry, how do you guys do with numbers? Because one of the things that Guyana is notorious for is a lack of statistics. Nobody knows how many nothing happened. Oh, you understand? You can't, I get complaint all the time, people call me from the UG, it's the passenger, they don't know nothing. I don't want to call names, but it seems as though we don't track stuff. And so, Sherry, what kind of tracking? How many sexual abuse cases, how many of them were as a result of, how you say, deliberate or not abuse, you know, right. So that if somebody comes, like if somebody has to do a doctoral study or a thesis, they can come to Child Protection, to ChildLinK, the Ministry of Education, and they can get statistics to verify and scientifically tie down something. How you do with that?
Well, I'm happy to say that that I believe that the Child Protection Agency does not fall in that they don't know anything, because officers are responsible for recording all cases that come to the agency. In fact, it begins from our intake, that we understand how many cases of neglect there are, physical abuse, sexual abuse, who was it perpetrated against, who was the perpetrator. And at present, you can have statistics for 2016, and we will have the statistics for 2017. So we're very good at keeping track of what comes into the agency.
And do you track, you're going to answer your numbers, man, you're going to answer just now. I know you got the numbers at the top of your head, I left you for last. Do you, how far do you track? Like, okay, a child comes to you and the child was 10 when the child reported. Do you track that child until they're no longer under your purview? I mean,
of course,
so that you know what became of the child?
Of course, we always monitor the child. We monitor children until there is stability in their life. Only then can a case ever be closed or a child ages out of the system, right? So we know what happens with the child. So because officers will have case files concerning children and will monitor their interactions, interventions with those children. So we know what happened to them past an intake process.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Numbers Guy.
No, well, I'm not going to give numbers, but what you're saying is correct. There is need for more research,
Yes,
for more statistics, and the Child Rights Alliance, one of the reasons we've done this child neglect in Guyana report is it's basically to whet the appetite of other researchers, to let them have a basis so that you can build on what we would have started.
Okay. Well, I know, Ms. Vivals, you behind the 8 ball, because you don't even have the personnel that you need to really begin to scratch the surface. But how do you approach it?
Now, presently we are in the process of doing a database system, because we find that we're lacking where it comes to record keeping. We have our records, but we need to develop a system whereby by the click of a button, we can have our, so that is in process now, that by the click of a button you can have data for region 1 straight on to 10, including Georgetown. And we hope to launch that by December 2017.
You know, I talked about my time when I worked as a family and community specialist there in the India and the Michiana area there in the United States. And what they do in the United States is they can tell, based on the dropout rate of K-12, right, for a certain class of children in a certain state, they can tell how they need to plan for incarceration.
That's so unfortunate.
Based on what is happening in the primary schools, because they track it. They know numbers, and they build their prisons and their penal institutions based on what is happening 10 years, 12 years out. That is how precise the numbers are. I hear you say just now, Tinny, that a lot of the neglect has consequences, dire consequences. What triggered in your brain that caused you to say that?
We can see it plainly. It's in the news. If one aspect of neglect is physical neglect, where there's inappropriate or not sufficient supervision for the child, and we've seen many cases where a child may have been left alone, the parent may have gone wherever, and some accident may have occurred, whether it's a fire or something, and sometimes children die in those cases. There are other cases where a parent probably would have left the child at home, and then there's a predator nearby, right? I'm not sure if the neglect is willful or not, but the child is alone, a predator is there, because even in the case with the Barbies, the young man from Barbies, there was a case where this perpetrator from Barbies, I don't know if you read it, but he was found fondling a young child, I think a 7-year-old child. Now, where was the parent? Right? So, yeah, dire consequences in the sense that the children are vulnerable to predators, accidents can occur. If the child doesn't die from the accident, if the child is sexually abused, the child could become pregnant, or STI, STD can occur. So it can be a public health issue as well.
Well, let me say, as a criminologist, and as a person who has worked with the prisons, one of the things that we find is that abused children go on to be abusers.
Pastor, sorry to cut you, but I wrote an article in the paper, and this is from an interview with one of our former clients. It was about a parent. She was busy. She was a single parent, but she was busy. So she wasn't paying too much attention to one of her daughters. And that child was sexually abused by a relative. And the child became HIV positive as a result.
Wow.
And eventually, the child revealed to the mom, well, this is what happened to me, and then they did test and they found that the child was HIV positive. Now, when we did counseling with the child and the parent realized, this child was trying to tell me what was going on, but because I was so busy, I wasn't paying that much attention to the child, and this happened. So here we see neglect being linked to sexual abuse. But it's not just that the child is traumatized from the abuse. No, the child is HIV positive, and that's a whole different level of trauma.
Yeah. Now, we are almost coming up to the top of the hour, and I wanted and tempted to introduce this idea. Not this idea, this troubling reality. This cell phone mashing up our young people.
Yes.
Oh my God, they're recording messages and themselves, and how you guys are dealing with it quickly. And you in the school system
Well,
directly.
we have a system whereby cell phones are not, it's prohibited in school, but you cannot use the cell phone during the instructional period, but after. If a child is found using the cell phone during the instructional period, we would take that cell phone and the parent would have to come to receive it.
What's your take on this, Mr. Tinney, on the cell phone scourge? I want to call it a scourge with our young people.
Well, from the cases that I know our councils have dealt with, I've never really heard of one where the cell phone played a significant role in it. So we've never really had that challenge of cell phones causing problems.
Sherry?
Well, what I would encourage is for parents to help children to understand how to use their technology responsibly. You see, it begins long before the phone is in the child's hand. If the child understands that this body is private, that it belongs to me, that nobody's to touch me inappropriately, and that this is my temple, I will think twice before I start flashing pictures and sending them out there. If I understand that I am important and I am worthy and I have a high self-esteem, I think twice before I let somebody belittle me in that particular way. So we need to teach the child certain things before we give them the cell phone, and then tell them how to use the cell phone and their technology responsibly.
Well, that's where
Yeah, you sound like you just preach at your church.
that's where we teach children about their rights, but also their responsibilities.
Beautiful.
And that is why we should instill the values in our
That's right.
children, good values.
Good. So, Miss, we're at the top of the hour. Ms. Vivos, take a half a minute and make an appeal based on what you do.
Well, I would like to appeal to viewers, parents, guardians, and caregivers that we should instill values in our children. We should know that neglect is everyone's business, and be it whatever is your situation, let your child know that you love them, and you would let them know that values will take you everywhere you go.
Beautiful. Mr. Tinney?
Well, I'd like our viewers to know that abuse, whether it's neglect, whatever form of abuse, it has a cost on the nation. If children are not protected, they cannot develop to their full potential. And if a child is abused or hurt, the police has to get in and investigate. There's a cost attached to that. The CPA have to do their part. There's a cost attached to that. So when children are not protected, the nation suffers economically.
Beautiful.
But if we ensure our children are protected, if we are our neighbor's keeper, we're vigilant, we look out for cases where abuse is happening, we lend a helping hand, because neglect may be a case where the parent may not have enough money, you lend a helping hand.
Okay.
Then what we can do is we can protect children and the nation will benefit as a result.
Okay. And Sherry?
I agree that, with my colleague, the Childcare and Protection Agency depends on members of communities to help us where children are concerned and where child abuse is concerned. You are our eyes and ears, and we depend on you to protect children. Whether it's to lend a helping hand, whether it's to report an issue of child abuse, we depend on you to be a part of this process. Child protection is not the mandate of the Child Protection Agency alone, or the director of the Child Protection Agency alone. It is everybody's responsibility, because what happens with our children, as my colleague rightly said, affects the nation.
Thank you so much. Well, we thank you so much for staying with us, and we hope that you would have benefited from the information. We had in the studios Gillian Vivos, Gillian Vivos, Asani Tinney, and Ms. Sherry Ann Van Diar from the Ministry of Education, ChildLinK, and Child Protection Services. Thank you so much. I'm Wendell Jeffrey, your host, and God bless you. Take care of your children, love them, and they will love you in return. Bye-bye.